Welcome to Wine Soundtrack USA. Listen to the passion with which producers narrate their winery and their world in 30 answers. Discover their stories, personalities, and passions.
Hello, friends and listeners of Wine Soundtrack. This is Allison Levine, and today I'm with Dan Fishman of the Donum Estate in Sonoma, California, actually in Carneros, more specifically. Dan, welcome, and tell us about Donum Estate.
So Donum is an estate Pinot Noir program. It was founded in 2001. It started out with just a few hundred cases. It's grown a little by little. So we're up to around 5,000 cases now. We have 4 estate properties, 2 in Carneros, 1 in the Russian River Valley, and a new one on the Sonoma coast that we're just developing now.
Wow. So are you working exclusively with estate fruit?
We do. We have only vineyards that we own and 1 long-term lease in Anderson Valley.
And what's your total acreage?
So we have about 150 total acres planted once everything is in production.
Wow. And exclusively Pinot Noir?
Pinot Chardonnay and 1 acre of Merlot for some reason.
Oh, Merlot, not what you typically expect to hear.
Yeah, just a little bit of an experiment. We'll see how it does. It's the heavy clay soil in Carneros, so it might actually be pretty good for Merlot.
Make a nice, silky, sexy Merlot. And where are your wines available? Where can people find them?
We sell most of our wine direct from the winery. We're available in a little bit in New York, Texas, the East Coast, a little bit in Nevada. And other than that, we sell, I think, over 90% direct.
And tell me, I know you're originally from Canada. What is your first memory relevant to wine?
I mean, my wine journey started when I was in college, and I took Wine Appreciation 101, the only college class I still use. So those are probably my earliest, at least quality wine memories.
At least you know a college education was good for something.
Exactly.
And so once you started on your little quest of tasting wine and studying wine, is there a particular wine that stands out to you as one of those memorable, pivotal wines that you drank, and what was that occasion?
Oh, man. I remember the very first wine that got me interested was actually just a Dr. Lucen Riesling. Really basic wine, but it had so many exotic flavors that I'd never tasted in any kind of alcoholic beverage before that I think that one kind of got me interested. And then, of course, there's been some higher-end wines along the way that kept the interest going, but that's what
Any in particular from any particular region?
I remember definitely getting pretty into Brunello for a little while early on, probably within the first couple of years that I was drinking wine. Don't necessarily remember all the producers. I remember having a Val di Cava Brunello that really stood out as being amazingly concentrated to me.
And so when you've traveled now around the world tasting wine and had the privilege to taste a lot of wines, obviously, in the work you do, is there a particular region that really stands out to you, producing some pretty spectacular wines in your mind? I mean, everyone does, but...
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, obviously being a Pinot guy, I'm very interested in taste more Burgundian varietals than anything else. I love Volnay in general as a kind of classic region. I love champagne too. That's probably my favorite wine, other than the ones I make. And I really love Barolo as well. And I'm actually supposed to go. We might have to delay that trip with everything going on, but hopefully we'll make it this year.
Yes, no viruses. We want to travel. So, if we were to come to your home and walk into your wine cellar or wherever you hide your wines, what would we find in there? What sort of examples of wines, what categories and regions would be represented there?
Well, if you walk into my wine cellar right now, you'll see a pile of wood because I'm trying to build the cabinets right now. I actually bought my house from another winemaker, and so he had a closet in the basement that's set aside for wine. So I'm trying to redo some of the shelving.
Ooh, that's very convenient.
Yeah. But I think I don't have an extensive collection of things that I'm aging. I do have several Côte-Rôtis set aside from my wife and I. Our honeymoon, we went to France and went to Côte-Rôtis, so I've got a decent amount of that, a little bit of Barolo Barbaresco, and then lots of the wines that I've made.
So Donum Estate, as well as you have your own label.
Right, so Donum Estate, and then I make Hatton Daniels is my own label, and I also make the wines for Ren Hop. So I have a few all over.
So you have a lot of different wines in your cellar. Is there anything you opened recently that tasted really good?
Yeah, actually, the one of the best wines I've ever had was sometime at the end of last year. I found some 64 Borgogno Barbaresco online for a seemingly impossible price, and bought them to see what if there was anything there, and the bottle was actually amazing. So that definitely stood out.
Do you have any left?
I have one more.
So you work a lot with Pinot Noir. That's obviously your baby, but do you think that it's a perfect variety, or do you think there's a such thing as a perfect variety?
I don't think so. I mean, obviously, in Europe you have these historical, grapes going back for centuries, and they've sort of matched them to the climate, but I bet you could grow other things in some of those regions and do fine. I think in California, we're just too early on the journey to say something. Obviously there are regions that are too hot for Pinot, too cold for Cabernet or whatever, although there's some amazing Cabernet on like the Sonoma coast. So I think Pinot is... California is a good place to grow Pinot, I think, because we don't have a lot of the weather pressure that makes it so tough in Burgundy or Oregon. And, so I think it's well suited, but it needs to, you need to obviously match it to the site, and it can crop really heavily in California if you're not careful. So that's probably, I think we spend a lot more work managing crop levels in California on Pinot than they need to elsewhere, because it will get heavy here.
So it's close to perfect, but not perfect.
Right.
So if I were to ask you just quickly, I have a guess of what your answer is going to be since you sort of said something before, but red, white, or rosé?
Ooh, I'd say red.
Still or sparkling?
Sparkling.
I kind of could have answered that for you. So you drink a lot of champagne, which can be not just celebratory, but paired with anything, and obviously Pinot as well. Do you? How do you look at food and wine pairing? Do you look for certain rules that you follow, certain protocols, or is it more about what you're in the mood for and you don't really care if it's going to work together? How would you approach it?
I mean, I think pairings are a lot harder than we give credit to it. I mean, it's not. I don't think there are any rules, because everything you cook is going to be so subtly different. So I think it's. One thing that my wife and I do sometimes is we'll open, say, 2 bottles, taste them, and then go to the grocery store and each try to make something that pairs with each of the wines.
Ooh, what a fun thing to do.
So kind of approaching it backwards, because I almost think that it's really hard to, think like you're tasting the food and then you think of the wine that would go with it. I think is really actually pretty hard unless you are lucky enough to have a massive collection. So in my case, I think it's almost easier to pair the food to the wine. But I don't try not to worry about it too much. I mean, I think good wine and good food will work, but it certainly, when you get it right, it's a whole other level.
So are you looking more for texture? Are you looking more for flavor? What sort of is your sort of main driving force in how you're pairing a wine?
Well, I think weight is really important first. I think, obviously, in general, a massive wine is going to be hard to pair. So I think staying on the lighter side makes it a little easier. And then I think, obviously this is not my theory, but, you can do something that complements or something that contrasts. And I think sometimes the contrasting pairing can be really interesting. So one of my favorites that I've noticed happens with my Hatton Daniels Rosé. It's made from Dornfelder, which is a pretty low acid grape. So it tends to actually, even though it's very low alcohol, not be a very acidic rosé. And I've found that a lot of vegan restaurants love it because vegan food tends to have a lot of acid to build the flavor when you're not working with meat and protein. So they build the flavor with high acids in the food. And so then if you have a wine that's not so acidic, it actually kind of works to pair that way.
Oh, how interesting. Would never think of that. So for somebody who hasn't had the pleasure to taste your wines yet, what do you think they're missing out on?
I think that what I like to think stands out or makes my wines different from others is I really focus on mouthfeel and concentration of flavor without heaviness. So across the board on all the wines I do, I try to keep the wines very light in body, but concentrated. So I think that's sort of where I've been able to distinguish some of the wines, is to have a really amazing amount of concentration, and people sometimes don't associate that with Pinot unless it gets into a really heavy, high alcohol Pinot. So we're trying to stay lower in terms of alcohol, but not thin. Still have a lot of body and mouthfeel in the wines.
If space aliens were to land on your property, which of your wines would you want to present to them?
That's a good question. I think I would probably give them the Donum West Slope Pinot, which comes from our oldest vines on the property. Kind of the best block. We do the best barrel, so it's sort of a top wine that we do. And since they'd be landing in Carneros, I'd want to give them something from that vineyard.
You think, yeah, because your winery is in Carneros. So.
It is, yeah, and I'm sure they'd be impressed with the art collection too.
Oh, really?
So Donum is, in addition to being a winery, has an incredible world-class sculpture collection. So the owner, Alan Warburg, passion for wine and a passion for art, and has combined the two at Donum. So we have, 40 sculptures spread throughout the property, some of which are, very important. Louise Bourgeois, Ai Wei Wei, Keith Haring, a lot of really incredible pieces. And about half of them were actually built for the site. So the artists came and visited, walked around the property, figured out where they wanted their piece to go, and then thought about what would go there. There's one of the newest ones is called Sonic Mountain by Doug Aitken, and he experienced the winds in Carneros, which of course is what the region is known for. And so he built this massive set of wind chimes that sit in the back in a eucalyptus grove, and when the wind picks up, they kind of play a little different song every day. There's 365 chimes, so the idea being one for each day of the year.
That's so cool.
So it's very immersive, and there's several interactive pieces like that as well.
So the artist created the art to fit the space the way you create a meal to fit your wine.
Yeah, exactly. And the art is something that I've been thinking about how it connects to our wines a lot. And I think, what I keep coming back to is that a lot of these pieces I saw as photographs or mock-ups before they were installed. And a lot of times maybe they looked a little odd or I didn't really get it. And then when it's actually in place and you experience it, there's just this amazing energy that comes from them. And I think that's what we try to get in the wines as well. It's just sort of, the wines are sort of showing the energy of the earth from this place. And with the art kind of being put in, it sort of expresses the same thing, I think.
So talking about that wind in Carneros and, the kind of beauty of the property, makes me think about vintages and vintage variation. We're pretty blessed in California that we're pretty similar year to year, but how much vintage variation do you think there is from year to year? Or do you think there are more things that are similar than different?
Yeah, I think that California doesn't have those, extreme vintage variations where you can have, an off year is pretty rare. They happen, but pretty rare. And I think even in a so-called off year, you can often make very successful wine. I think what the vintage variation more is kind of, it pushes the wines in a direction. And I think some people choose to fight that, choose to try to make, their wine in any vintage, which, you can do in California. But I think the most successful wines that I like are the ones that kind of roll with that vintage. So, sometimes just because it's warm or cold, that's not necessarily the determining factor, because we have so many degree days in California anyway. So you can always kind of ripen. But maybe, in a vintage with heat spikes, even though it's a hot year, you actually pick earlier to get ahead of the heat. And so you have lighter wines, or just as one example. But so I think that's where I think the wines that I love. And I think it is interesting because we talk so much about terroir and expression of place, but wine is also an expression of a year, of a time. So I think it is really maybe something that people are starting to hear people talk about a little bit more lately. And I think that's cool. And I think it's just a different thing. People obviously have always talked about great and weak Bordeaux vintages because that's what defines those wines often. But in California, it's more subtle, but still, I think, really important.
Yeah. So even though it's subtle, there are differences. So are there any signs or predictors or omens that you look for that are going to help you kind of determine what to expect in a current vintage, like kind of a predictor of what you might get?
There's certainly, obviously, indications along the way. I try not to worry too much about that. I think you can drive yourself crazy following the weather. Obviously, being in charge of the vineyards as well, obviously I need to be aware of that, and we need to, be prepared for whatever might happen weather-wise. But, at this time of year, we're looking at bud break. So, worries turn to frost, obviously, especially with such an early bud break this year. Once we get through that, then I think flowering weather is something that has actually varied a lot over the last decade in California. And that weather during flowering, we've had some unusual weather events in spring that can really affect. We're pretty fortunate in the locations of our vineyards don't seem to get hurt as badly. I know say in 2015, some Sonoma Coast vineyards, got essentially no crop because the weather was so weird during flowering, and we were down, but not anywhere near that extreme. So I think that's kind of the trade-off. The more extreme you get with your site, obviously the more risk, and I think that our new bodega property will have that risk of just some years it's going to be really tough out there. I'm hoping that the other years will make up for that.
It'll just make your wine a little more sought after in those tough years. So, do you have any good luck rituals that you do when harvest is about to start?
I don't know about rituals, but I've got my harvest box that always comes out of the closet with all my sampling gear and stuff like that, notebooks, field books, stuff like that. And then I try to celebrate the little things along the way. So we always try to have some champagne for the first pick, and note those things, first tank to go to barrel, last tank to go to barrel, all of that stuff. So we try to, kind of make time for those celebrations. And now being on the estate winery for the first time, we're able to really, I think, take a nice approach of, all having lunch together as a team, doing a little bit of wine at lunch, and kind of making it that way. But no, nothing too superstitious.
I don't know if it's superstitious, but I think finding every excuse to drink champagne while you're working is pretty good.
Exactly.
So you said that you're managing your vineyard. You're not just making the wine, but you're in the vineyard every day, and you're working with different properties. Sonoma Coast, Carneros, they're nuanced and have different reactions to what's happening. Do you ever talk to your vines? Do you ever have to get mad at one in a certain area and tell it off, or how to behave, or how do you communicate with your vines? Or for that matter, do you communicate with the wine when it's in the barrel?
Not directly, I don't think. I maybe muttering to myself, but no, I think, I think what you said about being in the vineyard every day, it is really important, I think, to just get out and walk around. I got a puppy about a year and a half ago, so he's kind of good at barking at me if I'm on the computer too long, and then we can walk around the vineyard. So he knows all the vineyards, he knows where all the swimming holes are, and I do think just being out there, walking around, seeing what's happening is really important. And of course, I work with a great vineyard manager for Donum, Laura Servin. He's been with Donum since 2008. And so, of course, he's handling a lot of the day-to-day management and his crew. And so we're working closely together. And we're in the process we've switched to organic, and we're in the process of bringing biodynamics into what we're doing. So there's a lot of new things that we're working on together. And really trying to take that proactive approach to kind of create an ecosystem in the vineyard so that we're not having to go back and correct for problems later. So we're really making a lot of changes very quickly, and I think already starting to see some progress there, which is nice.
Heading biodynamic, you'll be talking to your vines in no time.
right.
Or singing to the wines.
Under the moonlight.
So since you're going on a biodynamic path and you're working towards that way, you know how some people read tea leaves at the bottom of the glass to predict the future? What if you could read the bottom of a red wine glass? What would you want it to tell you?
Well, hopefully there's a lot of sediment, meaning it's a nice old wine. I don't know. I've never tried. Maybe I'll have to look at the bottom of the glass next time.
So when you were little, what did you want to be when you grew up?
So I famously, when I was in kindergarten, I wanted to be the secretary at school because I really liked her. Thought that was a cool job. Then I think I went through an astronaut phase, some sort of professional athlete. But I think realistically, I always thought I would either get into academia or maybe law, which I'm very glad I did not go that route. And I actually did go down the academic route. At first, I was in grad school for a few years working on a PhD in social psychology, and left that in 2007. I found an internship online, and someone had dropped out or something at the last minute, so I talked to the guy, and he said, yeah, you can have the job, but I need you here in a week. So I moved from Vancouver down to California in 2007.
You just happened to be looking for an internship in wine?
Yeah, I was just thinking, I knew I was done with grad school. I needed to move on, and I was thinking about wine. I'd been interested in it. And so I started poking around online looking for wine jobs, and I'd never realized that they hired completely unskilled, unexperienced people to work in the winery for harvest. So that's what I decided to do.
Well, it's a good thing they hire unexperienced people.
Exactly. So we always try to hire at least one person a year that
has no skill set.
Yeah, that's never done it before. hopefully has
it's
some
good
kind
that you
of
give
skills.
back. So when you're not working, how do you spend your free time?
Oh, well, lately I've been doing a lot of hiking with the dog. I play beach volleyball is kind of one of my main interests. And I, definitely wine is a big part of my life outside of work as well, I love to cook as well. So cooking, opening bottles, not as much travel lately, but I'm hoping to do more. And then I do travel a lot for Donum as well. So doing sales or events like this one. So I'm on the road a fair amount as well.
Yeah. It's hard to have free time when you're on the road traveling. So do you have a favorite sports team?
Yeah, I think the Yankees. I grew up in Toronto, never was a huge fan. My dad's from Chicago, so mostly Chicago teams, but for baseball, for some reason, I decided I like the Yankees. Of course, right when I decided is when they got bad, and they haven't had much success for the last 20 years. But
Well, if they were to have success again and win a championship, which of your wines would you want to present to them?
I would want to give them the Hatton Daniels Cabernet, because I think that would be the longest lived, and so they could hang on to that and
Hold on until they win again.
next one, exactly.
So you said that you and your wife like to cook together and maybe open up 2 bottles of wine, and obviously champagne is something you drink a lot of. If you're planning a romantic evening, what sort of wines would you be opening up to make a romantic evening?
Well, my wife is definitely more of a red wine drinker, so it would be red. And as I said, we went to Côte Rôtie for our honeymoon, so that's definitely a kind of special occasion, is to get into some of those wines. We also drink a lot of, lighter style, whether Pinot or Gamay, kind of just, yeah. I tend to not really buy wines in multiple. I tend to just, buy single bottles and try a lot of different things. I guess for learning, and I try to sometimes buy a few of the same wine, but yeah, I think it would have to be either Côte Rôtie or we do drink a lot of the wines that I make, obviously.
I'm going to ask you one little, question that sometimes makes people shift in their seat a little how to answer. But what's your opinion on wine critics and scores?
I think it's interesting. It's something I certainly thought about. It's hard to communicate, the value of a wine with a point score. And I think, unfortunately, a lot of the critics put a lot of time into writing their tasting notes, and then people don't actually look at them. They just look at the score, which is too bad, because, you can often, and people say, oh, I hate wines that are rated high by this critic. And it's like, well, did you read the note? Because maybe, you could find the ones that you would like within that.
Right, because maybe because maybe sometimes the words are more of a descriptor that will help you through it.
Yeah, and I think that really that's I think what sets apart maybe some of the most successful critics is they actually do write about the wines in a way that gets people excited to try them. And so I think it's definitely a shame when all that gets looked at is the score. I've had pretty good success especially with Donum, in terms of getting scores, which I think is great. And I hope that when people taste the wine, they have that experience. But I really do think that the tasting note is more important than
Absolutely.
The number. But
And tasting the wine is even more important.
definitely even better to actually try the wine.
So tell me something. If looking back at your career, what would you say is one of your proudest achievements to date?
I actually think just doing the 2019 harvest for the first time in our estate winery, getting through a lot of fruit, it was the most wine we'd ever made, plus we were doing it in a brand new building, plus I'd just taken over managing the vineyards as well. So I think it's not one specific thing, but I think making that harvest work and getting to the point where tasting the wines now, I'm really, really happy with where they are. So I think that doing that, opening the winery, we did it all with native yeast. So, we have a winery that's now never had commercial yeast in it, which I think is going to hopefully develop into a really interesting thing. So I think that's probably, a recent thing, but something that I'm quite proud of.
Wow, that's really cool. it's very mindful that you're able to start the winery with that in mind, that you want to start with natural yeast and you don't want to bring in anything commercial.
Yeah, it's a really great opportunity, and you only get one chance, because once you bring the yeast in, it's there forever, essentially. So I was really happy, and it was, we make a range of styles of wine for Donum. So some of the earlier stuff is easy; it's fermenting to relatively low alcohol. But as you get deeper into harvest and things get riper, it starts to get a little more stressful, and you start thinking about, man, is this the right decision? So it took kind of a commitment to see it through. And also, in the beginning, it was slow to start because there just wasn't a yeast population, in the building, and so it took a while for that to get going. And so we were sort of checking our watches and wondering when these things were going to start fermenting, but we stuck it out, and so I think that was really successful.
Yeah. It's an accomplishment to survive a harvest like that when you're just not sure what's going to happen.
Right.
So when you look back at all the advice that you've received over the years, it could be for your career, for how you want to live your life, or how you want to work or just be as a being. Is there a piece of advice that someone once gave you that is one of those things that kind of is a driving force in your life? And who gave it to you?
I honestly don't know. I think I would need to think about it. I'm sure that there is, and there's obviously lots of people that I've worked with professionally or otherwise that have had a big influence. But I'm having a hard time thinking of any one particular piece of advice. It's funny. Yeah, no, I can't think of anything off the top of my head. But
is there
it'll come to me.
Is there sort of a belief or a work ethic you try to live by?
Definitely. I mean, I think for me, I try to keep a really good balance between really striving for excellence, but at the same time not taking things too seriously. I try to, have a sense of humor about things, and try to really, as I've moved up in my career, obviously I'm working with more people, managing other people where I would be their boss, I guess, and really just trying to be mindful of, that, I guess, work-life balance or whatever you want to call it, or even just not so much in terms of hours, but in terms of like mental energy, and just trying to make things as positive as they can be, while at the same time, being very serious about making a great product, having a great result, but also not taking ourselves too seriously at the same time.
If you could offer our listeners a piece of advice, what would you tell them?
All right, this one I am going to quote someone on.
Okay.
It was something that Warren Zevon said on David Letterman toward very near the end of his life. He said, "Enjoy every sandwich." And I thought that was great life advice.
Enjoy every sandwich. Why not? Enjoy every bottle of wine.
Yeah, exactly.
So on that note, if you're enjoying every bottle of wine, finish this sentence for me. A table without wine is like...
A sandwich without bread?
Hence, it's not a sandwich. So imagine this scenario. A restaurant, there are windows, and there's a lot of paparazzi outside taking pictures because they're really impressed at the person sitting at the table. And that person is drinking a bottle of Donum Pinot Noir. Who would you want that person to be?
Ooh, that's a good one. I think it would be really cool to me if Ben Gibbard from Death Cab for Cutie was drinking Donum. I really like the way he writes music, so I think that if the wine spoke to him in some similar way, that would be pretty cool.
Very cool. So, we were talking about vintage before and vintage variation and what harvests are and sort of the challenges of being on the coast, but also the similarity that we have being in California. Everyone talks about climate change and how that's going to affect vineyards and regions. You think we're going to be drinking wine, making wine in 500 years?
I'm sure we will be. I mean, assuming we're still around. But yeah, I think. Well, what's one of the amazing things about vines is they are so resilient and so adaptable. So I think that it's hard to imagine an Earth that's habitable for humans in which it wouldn't be for vines. so I think that hopefully 500 years from now we'll have a way better understanding of what the perfect grape for California is, or for a specific location in California.
Absolutely. Now, if that didn't work out and you were sent to a deserted island, which 3 wines would you want to take with you?
I'd probably bring just a bottle of champagne, a bottle of Pinot, and a bottle of Nebbiolo.
Okay. Specifically, a Pinot that you've made? Or from Sonoma?
Yeah. Why not? Let's bring one of my wines so I have something to show the people on the desert island. Yeah. So and I've actually got some sparkling wine aging on lees right now. So maybe I can bring that too if it turns out well.
Ooh. Wow, I want to try your sparkling wine.
Yeah, you'll have to. Well, I think we're going to disgorge one of the vintages this year, probably.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Very cool. Well, we're almost finished, but one little game that we like to play. You had talked about how Donum has a beautiful art sculpture garden at the property and how art and wine have sort of gone hand in hand. I want to talk about how wine and music go hand in hand. So based on some of the wines that you've talked about and some of the wines you make, I want you to pair them with music, either the kind of mood that it would put you into, what you'd want to listen to, or what the wine reminds you of music-wise. So let's start with your favorite beloved champagne.
Ooh, so champagne. I'd go champagne and the Weaker Thans, which I don't know if you know them. They're Canadian, kind of, sort of like a little bit on the edge of like that pop punk, but more folky. It's kind of hard to explain unless you've heard them, but I think it would be good. They got a little bit more up tempo, but John K. Sampson is an amazing lyric writer as well, and so some of those songs sound kind of poppy on top, but then when you actually listen to the words, there's a lot more depth to it.
Very cool.
Like champagne.
Very cool. Okay, what about Côte Rôtie, one of the wines you brought back from your honeymoon?
Well, a classic French wine like that, I think, is always funny to put on the, like the accordion-style French bistro music. It's always good.
Okay.
Another option, maybe, I think Syrah and the Smiths would go well together. Yeah.
Syrah and the Smiths. I like that. It kind of has a ring to it. Yeah. Okay, what about your the Pinot that you had mentioned that you would give to the space aliens?
Yeah, so the West Slope.
Carneros,
yeah, so that should be something vintage, I think, because those are our oldest vines. Maybe Talking Heads, something like that, something from the 80s, yeah.
And what about the one you would give to the Yankees if they won, your long-aging wine?
The Cabernet, so that's got to be a little bigger, a little darker. I'm going to go with another Canadian band. We're going to go with Bar Brothers. They're not technically, I think they're actually not Canadian, but they're based in Canada.
And last one, Nebbiolo from Piemonte.
Ooh, Nebbiolo. And that's a cerebral wine, so it needs to be something deep. Maybe something even older, like the band.
Oh, okay. I'm not going to put you through any more tests. You did that very well. The consternation on your face as you're like, Cabernet, Napa, what do I do?
I want the pairing to be perfect.
So we're almost finished here, but I know that at the beginning we talked about how you had a trip planned, hopefully planned. Where else, or is that the place that's at the top of your bucket list to go explore?
Yeah, that one really is. That's to Piedmont, so I really want that trip to happen because I've never been, and I'm definitely fascinated with the wines. I've never been to Italy, period. So it would be. I really hope that one comes together. And then I also have a trip planned with my family. My parents' 50th wedding anniversary is this year, so we're going to the Czech Republic. I've never been there either. So.
Going to explore a little wine over there?
I don't know. I haven't got. My wife and I are then also going to Vienna, so I'm sure we'll do some Austrian wine stuff. But I need to do a little more research on Czech Republic and see what's there.
Interesting. Well, I hope you get to Italy soon and multiple times because it's definitely a big country that takes more than one time to visit. In the meantime, if someone wanted to come visit you in Sonoma, where can they find you and how can they visit you?
Yeah, so Donum Estate, we do private tastings. We're really nice, tasting with some pairings. We also, in conjunction with the organic and biodynamic, we're doing the vineyard. There's a biodynamic vegetable farm on the property, and so they're doing pairings with some of the stuff that comes from the property with each of the wines. So it's a really nice tasting experience, and that can be booked on the Donum website or by calling the estate.
Great. And it's appointment only?
It is by appointment, by reservation. Yep.
And 7 days a week?
7 days a week.
Great. Well, so we go to donumestate.com?
Correct.
donumestate.com to book an appointment or to see about wines because they're direct to consumer. And so we hope people will plan their trips to Sonoma, and I hope you plan your trip to Italy. So Dan, thank you so much for joining us on Wine Soundtrack, and have a great day.
Thanks for having me. A lot of fun.
Thanks for listening to a new episode of Wine Soundtrack USA. For details and updates, visit our website, winesoundtrack.com.